Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now that we're recording so that we can save this afterwards, tonight's class is going to be about the power of communication, the power of using the right words to communicate what we're feeling, what we're thinking. And what we're going to be discussing tonight, obviously with a beautiful lesson from this week's Torah reading, is about finding that balance, finding that perfect place in between delivering the message we want to deliver, the truth that we feel in our hearts, and yet how to deliver it in the right way, in the most effective way, and if there is a right way or a wrong way of communicating truth. Well, let's start, of course, with the Torah reading, the parsha that we're going to be using as our basis for tonight's class. I'm sure that every single one of you are familiar with the famous story of Noach and the ark. You all know the story where Noach is told where the world is evil and corrupt, and God comes to Noach and he says to Noach, Noach, I've looked at the world and the world is corrupt, the world is evil, the world is terrible. I'm sick of the world. I want to put you in charge. I want you to build an ark, and you're going to be the one who will save humanity. Let's read together exactly what God tells Noach at this time. So God comes to Noach, this is chapter 7, verse number 1. And the Lord said to Noach as follows, come into the ark, make this bigger, come into the ark, both you and all your household, for it is you that I have seen as a righteous man before me in this generation. Of all the clean animals, you shall take for yourself 7 pairs, a male and its mate, and of the animals that are not clean, 2, a male and its mate. Also of the fowl of the heavens, 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive on the face of the earth. For in another 7 days, I will make it rain upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will blot out all beings that I have made off the face of the earth. Okay, these 4 verses are the command of God to Noach to go into the ark. So, of course, there's many, many lessons and messages over here. First, the fact that God tells him to go into the ark with his whole family because he's righteous. But here's the verse we want to focus on, verse number 2, where God says to Moses, of all the clean animals, you shall take 7, and of all the animals that are not clean, right over here, 2, a male and its mate. If you look in the Hebrew, you'll see this very clearly. From all the behema ha-tahora, tahora means a pure animal, you should take 7. And min ha-behema asher lo tahora, and from the animal which is not clean, you should take shnayim, 2, ish v'ishto, a man and a male and a female. Okay. Let me stop sharing for a second. So here's a very, very interesting verse. God comes to Noach and saying to Noach, take 7 animals that are kosher and 2 animals that are not kosher. Why does he need 7 kosher animals and only 2 not kosher animals? So it is well known that God wanted Noach to make offerings of the kosher animals when he would come off of the ark at the end of the 40, at the end of it's really a full year, at the end of the 365 days that he would be on the ark. When he would come off the ark, he should make offerings, and he should make offerings and bring offerings to Hashem. How did Noach know which animals are kosher and which animals are not kosher? So here's an obvious proof that Noach studied the entire Torah even before it had been given to him. Even before Noach had the entire Torah, the Jews didn't have the Torah yet, and yet by God telling Noach, take 7 pure animals and 2 unpure animals, is a proof, tells us the Rashi, that Noach already knew the whole Torah, even though it had not yet been given. Okay, I want to focus on the language that the Torah uses. If you look at the language that the Torah uses to describe the animals that are pure, the Torah said, you shall take from the behema that is tahor, that is pure. And when it says later in the verse to take the non-kosher animals, what is the language that it uses? From from the animal that is not pure. Now, let me ask you a simple question. If you wanted to say something is not pure, you know how you say it in Hebrew? Tameh. In Yiddish, you would say treif. I'm sure you all know the word treif. Treif means not good. Treif. Tameh is the Hebrew way of saying not kosher. So instead of the Torah saying that you should take from the behema, from the animal that is tahar, umin ha-behema asher einena tahora, and from the animal that is not tahar, that is not pure, you know what the Torah could have just said? Take from the behema, the animal which is tahar, and from the animal which is tameh, which is impure. And if the Torah would have done that, it would have been very clear exactly which animals Noach was supposed to take and which ones he was not supposed to take. But instead, the Torah uses really like legal language, legal verbiose language. Is very, very complex, and goes and scratches its ear like this and tells you, you know which animals you should take? The tahar and asher einena tahora, that which is not pure. So we can ask a very simple question. Why does the Torah, which very often uses the word tameh, not just use the word that it normally would use, and instead say it in a more lengthy way? Generally speaking, when the Torah is writing something, there's one of two conditions or two considerations the Torah uses to decide how to write it. Number one is brevity. The Torah is always written in a concise, specific language. The Torah never writes things extra long if it doesn't need to. The second consideration is that it should be clear. In this verse, when the Torah says you should take 7 of the animals which are pure and 2 of the animals that are not pure, instead of saying that are impure, the Torah is not being shorter in language, and the Torah is not being any more clear by using these extra words. And so therefore, we need to understand why the Torah writes 3 words instead of 1. Instead of writing tameh, it writes asher einena tahora, and it's 8 extra letters. Now, you may argue, you may say, Rabbi, you're getting carried away. You're getting carried away. The fact that it's 8 letters, what's the big deal? 8 letters. How much is 8 letters already? Nothing. 8 letters is nothing. Now, such pushback would only occur to a person who doesn't appreciate the holiness and the sanctity of every single letter in the Torah. So when you don't appreciate the holiness of a letter in the Torah, so you say, what's the difference? 8 letters more, 8 letters less. But you have to understand that when we study the Torah, we understand that who wrote the Torah? God wrote the Torah. And when God wrote the Torah, God doesn't make mistakes. God is not someone or an entity that it wasn't careful how he wrote it. When God writes something, everything he writes, it's perfect. It's perfect. So if you accept that the Torah is the word of God, and that God wouldn't say a single word or a single letter for no reason, and if you're familiar with the way that the Talmud works and the Mishnah works, you know that there's thousands of pages of Talmud that are all explaining letters of the Torah. Each word of the Torah has to teach us a different message, a different reason what that word is telling us in the verse. There's no extra words. So you understand that the question is a very, very important question. Even more so. There's a beautiful story in the Talmud that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, came on, he saw God on Mount Sinai, was writing the crowns in the letters of the alphabet. So if you look at a Torah scroll, I'll show you something. I have a mezuzah. It's in my office. I have some show and tell. If you look at the way a Torah or scroll is written or a mezuzah is written, there are little crowns. See, make it clear. Oopsies. Try and get it clear. No, not clear. No. How do I make this clear? There's little crowns on top of the letters, but it's not clear. So there's little crowns on top of the letters. There you go. You see the little crowns on top of the lamed, on top of the tzad? There's little crowns. What are those crowns for? Why do you need those crowns on top of the letters? As you can see it. No. So I'm focusing. Look at the word nafshecha. See on top of the nun, on top of the shin and nafshecha, there's these little crowns. What are those crowns for? So when Moshe saw God writing these crowns on top of the letters in the Torah, Moshe says to God, what are you doing? Why are you writing that? What's the point? And God tells Moshe Rabbeinu that you should know that there's one day going to be a man called Akiva, famous Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva is going to expound on every single crown of those letters. And the Talmud says that Moshe saw a vision of Akiva and he couldn't understand what he was saying. The point is, not only is every letter in the Torah valuable, not only does every letter in the Torah teach us a message and a lesson, but even those little lines, those little crowns that are on top of some of the letters, even those crowns teach us a lesson. And therefore, we need to understand what these extra 8 letters teach us. By the way, especially because I'm sure you all know the law that if even one letter in the Torah scroll is incorrect, if even one word or even one letter is missing from a Torah scroll, even though there's 304,000 letters in the Torah scroll, one letter is missing, the whole Torah scroll is not kosher. The whole Torah scroll is not kosher. So if that's the case with even one letter of the Torah scroll would make the whole Torah not kosher, here we have 8 letters that we need to understand that were written by God on purpose. They're not 8 letters by mistake. What lesson in communication can we learn from the fact that when God communicated this command to Noach to take pure animals and not pure animals into the ark, he said, the animals that are not pure, what lesson can we take from them the way we communicate? So the Talmud actually answers this question. The Talmud has the exact same question, and the Talmud gives a beautiful answer. So I'm going to share with you a piece of Gemara in Psachim, in Tractate Psachim, right over here. So the Talmud in Psachim, let's make sure that is talking about the night of Bedikas Chametz. The night of Bedikas Chametz. And when you search the Chametz they search the home for Chametz. So it says they should search the Chametz on the on the night of the 14th. It doesn't say the word night, it says on the light. Why is this? So it says that this is why does it use this euphemism? Whoopsies. Sorry. Why does it use this euphemism? So it says, we went out of place. Right here. Why do we use this euphemism? So this is the thing. It tells us the night of the 14th, but it used a euphemism. Why? In accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. As Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, a person should never express a crude matter. As the formulation of a verse was distorted by the addition of 8 letters, rather than have it express a crude matter, as it is stated, from the pure animals and from the animals that are not pure. Asher einana tahora, our verse in Genesis. To avoid using the Hebrew term for impure, which is tameh, which is only 4 letters, tet, mem, aleph, hey, the verse replaces this term with the euphemism meaning that are not pure, which is spelled with 12 letters. Aleph, shin, resh, aleph, yod, nun, nun, hey, tet, hey, resh, hey. So the 12 letters could have been written with only 4 letters, leaves us with 8 additional letters. Okay? This is the teaching of so this is the teaching of Yeshua ben Levi that teaches us why the Torah uses these extra words. For what reason? To teach us a valuable lesson in communication. That you should know that it's worth it to use extra words in order to always speak in a nice way. We should never speak in a crude manner. That's the words of the Talmud. The Torah could have said, tameh, impure. But that would have been crude. That would have been not nice. And therefore, the Torah was willing to use all these extra letters to avoid saying that an animal is not kosher. Okay, my friends, what's the obvious question on that statement in the Talmud? What is the obvious question with the Talmud telling us that the reason why it uses 8 additional letters is because the Torah didn't want to say the word tameh, that the animal is impure. So in order to avoid using a not nice word, the Torah uses all these extra letters. What's the question? Someone that's watching us on Facebook or someone watching us on our website, you can go ahead and comment, tell us, what is the obvious question with that? Anybody? Nobody? The obvious question is that the Torah uses the word tameh, impure, over 100 times. There's over 100 times in the Torah when the Torah says that an animal is not pure. Of course, the most famous place will be in the laws of kosher. In the laws of kosher, the Torah says that you should eat all the kosher animals, and then the Torah explicitly says, but the pig is tamehu lachem, it is impure, and the arneves is impure, and the camel is impure. The Torah says impure many, many times. When it talks about ritual purity, ritual impurity, about a person that has a seminal emission, etc., about a person that has leprosy, tsaras, the Torah says over and over again, tameh. So if we have over 100 times in the Torah where the Torah clearly says the word impure, so what does Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi mean when he says, oh, by the way, the Torah uses extra words to avoid writing a not nice word like the word impure? I can show you 100 places where the Torah says the word impure. So before we get into understanding this Gemara, let's talk about speech for a minute. Our society places great value on the freedom of speech, right? Freedom of speech is enshrined in our Constitution, our Second Amendment right. Sorry, not a Second Amendment. Our First Amendment, to be able to have the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press. In America, the freedom of speech is something which we take very, very seriously, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. Freedom of speech is absolutely something that is critical to a healthy, functioning society, that an individual should have the right to voice their opinion, to even if the people that are in power don't agree with their opinion, this is critical. However, even in American society, we understand that there's certain limitations on free speech. The very famous example would be that if you went into a stadium and you scream fire, and then there's pandemonium and chaos, and people are running and trampling each other on the way out the door, you would be held liable and obligated for any damage happened as a result of the mass confusion from you screaming fire in this movie theater. General rule of thumb is that you have freedom of speech as long as it does not directly hurt or curtail others of their freedom. But besides for the legal limitations on freedom of speech, we also have society has placed certain limitations on verbal expression as well. Certain phrases that were once broadly accepted in society are now considered verboten. They're considered not appropriate, especially in today's society where we are dealing with a very emotionally charged topic of political correctness. And there are many things that people in the past, normal words that were used that today no one would think of using because there's no legal prohibition, there's no legal liability for using such words. But today's society has come to understand that certain words are not nice, that they can be hurtful, that they're not nice to other people, and therefore we don't use them. So obviously, political correctness is a very delicate subject, and some people feel that it's a good thing. Some people feel that it's craziness and that it's a totalitarian control to limit the way I speak. But I think that everyone can agree that the concept of limiting certain words in order to avoid hurting other people, theoretically, is something good. Theoretically, the idea of being sensitive to others is something which is important. However, even if you don't agree, or whether or not people in American society believe that there's value and beauty in using language carefully to avoid hurting other people, we definitely know that Judaism has a different perspective and a different appreciation on the importance of freedom of speech. In fact, in Judaism, I hate to say it, but in Judaism, you do not have freedom of speech. In Judaism, you do not have freedom of speech. In Judaism, there's a number of laws that directly limit, what you're allowed to say. Of course, the most famous of all those laws is Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is the prohibition of speaking ill about somebody else. And needless to say, Lashon Hara, the prohibition of speaking slander, of speaking ill of another person, is something which is very well known, and people don't appreciate maybe how strict and how demanding the laws of Lashon Hara are. For example, not only are you not allowed to speak bad about somebody else, you're not even allowed to imply something negative about somebody else. You're not even allowed to hint or to make with your eyes or to say something that someone will get the implication that you're saying something bad about somebody else. So, for example, someone says, Joe is so kind. So, yeah, I won't tell you about Jill. I'm not even going to talk about her. So he didn't say anything bad about Jill. But by saying, I'm not going to talk about Jill, you already implied the day that you're going to talk about Jill, something bad about her. You're not allowed to ask a question that they can answer. That would also be Lashon Hara. Meaning, so in American society, we're very focused on freedom of speech, and for good reason. Again, for good reason. But the Torah stresses the importance of compassion and of sensitivity to others, that even though you want to say something that's true, you're not allowed to say it. You're not allowed to say something that could hurt someone's feelings, that could have a negative impact on them, that could even be implied in your language, in your body language, in what you didn't say, in what you, the way you said it, that could come across as negative. You say, someone gives you a compliment about somebody, say, yes, it's true. They mean well. I said nice. I said they mean well. But when you say they mean well, the implication is that although they mean well, they actually don't do things so well. That would also be considered Lashon Hara. Okay, that's one restriction on free speech in Judaism. There's another very serious restriction on free speech in Judaism, and that is, anyone? Telling a lie. Famous verse, Midvar Sheker Tirchak. You can never tell a lie. In fact, not tell a lie. The words Midvar Sheker Tirchak mean that you should distance yourself as far as possible from any kind of falsehood. Not only from a lie, but even from stealing someone's mind, from saying something exaggerating is also forbidden. Again, in American society, there's no prohibition on lying as long as you don't damage somebody else. So obviously, yes, if you're going to tell a lie and steal from someone or commit fraud, that's fraud. But the concept of that I am legally not allowed to, that I have to watch what I say, to be honest, Torah is very strict about this. Now, let me ask you a question. What happens when you want to say a truth? Something is not a lie. Something is true. So I want to share a truth about someone that I think is very important, that the whole world should know this truth about this person. I'm not telling you the truth. But the truth is hurtful. The truth is hurtful. Are you allowed to say a hurtful truth about somebody else? Do I need to speak the truth no matter what? So as we just said, you're not allowed to tell a lie. But does that mean that you need to share the truth? So there's a beautiful saying from I'm not sure if it's from the Alter Rebbe or if it's just a saying of Hasidim. In Yiddish, it sounds very good in Yiddish. The saying is as follows. A sheker, a ligin termin neshagin. A ligin, a lie, you're not allowed to say. Aber the emes darf man neshagin, but the truth you also don't need to say. A ligin termin neshagin, you're not allowed to lie. But just because you're not allowed to lie doesn't mean you need to say the whole truth. Sometimes Sometimes there's true things that have to be kept to yourself. There's things that are absolutely true, and yet you have to keep them quiet. You have to keep them to yourself. You're not allowed to promote them and to announce them and to talk about them. It's true, granted, but even though it's true, keep it to yourself. There's a religious joke, a rabbi joke, that in Judaism there's 4 sections of halach, of Jewish law. So in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, you have 4 different sections of law. And so the joke is that there's actually a 5th chelik, a 5th section, a 5th book of law. That 5th law is called common sense. Common sense. Meaning, maybe it's not one of the 4 books of Jewish law, but it's the 5th book called common sense. I say a story, just a story from it is always good. This man came to a rabbi with a question. It was before Passover. He wanted to know if he was allowed to use milk for the 4 cups of wine on Passover. Asking a question, if he doesn't have wine, could he, instead of making the Haggadah on wine, could he do it on milk? So the rabbi tells him, I don't know the answer right now. It's right before Passover. I'm busy. He takes out a large amount of money. He says, here's some money. Go ahead, buy whatever you need take whatever you need for Passover, buy matzah, buy meat, buy wine, whatever you need, and we'll figure it out after the holiday. And so his wife asks him, he didn't need so much money for wine. A bottle of wine costs 5 ruble. He gave him 50 ruble, 100 ruble. So the rabbi told him, tells his wife, if he's asking me about wine, milk instead of wine, he obviously has no money for meat. He obviously has no money for fish. He has no money for meat, for matzah. So I gave him whatever he needs. That's common sense. I see a question over here. Isn't it straightforward halacha? Because lashon hara. Yeah, is what a straightforward halacha? I don't understand your question, Ari. The point is that not everything that could be said or that's true should be said. There's many things that might be true, but just because they're true, you're not allowed to tell a lie. But just because it's true, the Torah clearly tells us, maybe that's what you're saying, Ari. Lashon hara means that you're not allowed to say something that will hurt someone else, even though it's true. In fact, lashon hara is true. Lashon hara is not a lie. Lashon hara is not a lie. A lie is something else. If you say something false about, yes, Ari, you're correct. If you say something false about somebody, that's a different prohibition called motzi shemra. Motzi shemra means you're saying lies about another person. You're starting false rumors. Lashon hara means that every single word is true. And yet, even though it's true, you're not allowed to say it. Okay. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said he saw, it's a very beautiful mission on the ethics of our fathers, that of all the qualities of the sages, I did not find anything better for the rabbis than silence. Silence was more powerful than anything that they would say. The Rebbe had a line. The Rebbe, in the number of letters, even when he spoke, he wanted to push a certain agenda. The Rebbe told people that they should speak to a certain person. Listen to the words. B'toikif hamasim, with the necessary strength and conviction, ubidar kinayim, but also with a pleasant manner. And say it strong, but say it nice. Speak the truth. Don't bend on your convictions, but say it in a nice way. Okay. I think the point is clear. So we see Judaism has very, very clear restrictions on what words we're allowed to say. We have to be careful not hurting others. When the Torah is speaking about the animals that are not pure, the Torah doesn't say not kosher animals. It says the animals that are not pure. It doesn't say treif animals. It doesn't say tamei. It says the animals that are not pure. So now let's go back to our question that we had. Question is very simple. There's over 100 times when the Torah says the word tamei. There's over 100 times when the Torah is explicit in saying this is bad. This is not pure. So why does it? This is treif, I should say. So why in this particular instance, in the story of God communicating to Noach that he should bring the animals into the ark, does he say take 2 of the animals that are not pure? So you should know that the Torah can be divided into 2 parts. There's the majority of Torah, which is laws, halacha, commandments, clear direction, clear statement, do this, don't do that. And then there's a part of Torah, primarily the first book of the Torah, the book of Genesis, which is stories, primarily. Again, there's many, many lessons in Genesis too, but it's primarily telling us stories about creation, about our forefathers, or the Jews going down to Egypt, etc., etc. When the Torah is giving us a mitzvah, when the Torah is telling us a commandment, the primary concern of the Torah is accuracy, clarity, truth. And therefore the Torah says black and white, this animal is treif. This animal is tameh. This person that had this emission, this person with the tsaras, tameh. Treif, not good, it's not good. Clear. You don't want anyone to get any not clarity when giving a halachic ruling. Sometimes some rabbis, they want to give a halachic ruling and they're trying to be politically correct, how they say that to her, not to be too strong in their language. So you say it in the whole way that everyone can hear in the ruling what they wanted to hear. But when the Torah is telling us a story, and the primary objective here is not to tell us a halacha, it's not to tell us a ruling that's relevant to our lives, how to eat, what not to eat, but to know a story of a Noach that thousands of years ago. There's absolutely no permission to say something not nice. In such a case, even though it will take more letters, even though it won't add to the narrative and to the clarity of the story, you can't use not nice words. You have to use extra words in order the words you use are nice and kind. It's a very, very beautiful message over here. The Torah goes out of its way. The Torah uses 8 more letters in order to tell us a principle of life, which is not only the importance of the truth, but of saying the truth in a sensitive way, saying the truth in a kind way, in a language that is refined and that is clean, etc. And this brings us to a very, very important topic that's difficult to speak about a little bit, but I want to speak about it because it's something that it truly bothers me to see. We live in a time that many people strongly disagree with each other. Now, there's nothing wrong with disagreeing with somebody else. There's nothing wrong with having very strong feelings about the president or about wearing masks or about immigration or about gun control or about anything. Nothing wrong. Every single person's entitled to have their opinion, and every opinion has some element of truth, maybe has some element of where it's not true, but that's irrelevant. Even when you're telling a story, when you're talking about another person, when you're discussing someone who lives in your community, who lives in your neighborhood, who lives in your city, who's an American citizen just like you are not allowed to use the word treif. You're not allowed to say, this is wrong. You're not. When you're talking about a person who is part of your community or a person who's part of your country, the Torah does not allow you to say the word bad about it. You have to go out of your way. Use more words. Speak in a more convoluted language like this. Scratch your ear upside down. But don't say treif. Don't say tameh. Say he is not tahar. He is not a pure animal. The Rebbe was one of the big proponents in the power and in the importance of the words that we use. The words that we use are critical in creating reality. Meaning, in Kabbalah, we know that words are not just methods of expressing something we're feeling inside or something we're thinking, but Kabbalah tells us that words are actual vehicles of creation. I mean, it's not, the idea is not from Kabbalah. The idea is in last week's Torah reading, the very beginning of Genesis. How did God create the universe? Vayomer Elokim Yihar. God spoke and there was light. God spoke, so let the earth sprout forth vegetation, and the earth sprout forth vegetation. So Kabbalah teaches us that the words that God used to create existence were specifically letters, because letters and words are divine conduits of energy, divine energy, that actually create realities in the universe. There's a very famous Hasidic story that was actually printed in the Hayom Yom a few days ago, of a story of the Baal Shem Tov. That once in the shul of the Baal Shem Tov, there were several men that were standing around. They were having an argument. They were arguing. And sometimes when Jews argue, they get very, very heated. And they get very graphic and descriptive in their language. And so one of the men that got really angry, the other said, he got so angry, he said, if I could, I would tear you apart like a fish. And when the Baal Shem Tov heard this man saying to the other that I would tear you apart like a fish, the Baal Shem Tov gathered all of his Hasidim together. He put them into a big circle. He told them to all put their arms on each other's shoulders, and they all closed their eyes. And then the Baal Shem Tov himself put his hands on the shoulders of the two people that were closest to him, completing the circle. And now there was a complete closed circle of students of the Baal Shem Tov, all holding their hands on each other's shoulders with their eyes closed. And all of a sudden they began to scream and shout in fear, because they were able to see, with the Baal Shem Tov holding them, a clear vision of this person being torn apart like a fish. Literally, his body being pulled apart by the flesh the way you would tear apart a fish. Then he took his hands off their shoulders and he explained to them that when we say something, in heaven it creates a reality. It's not just words. Words are not just words. Words are real. They are the vehicles of creation. Words have the power to create and to change and to define the realities. They change realities. The Rebbe was such a proponent of using positive words instead of negative words. So many stories that are seemingly small things, but the words can change the reality. One very, very beautiful example is about how to call a hospital. You can call a hospital in Hebrew, in Israel, a hospital is called a Beit Cholim, which literally means a house of sick people. And the Rebbe said they shouldn't call it a Beit Cholim, a house of sick people. He told the doctor, I forgot the name of the doctor offhand, doctor from Israel. He argued with him that they should change the name of the hospital, instead of being called Beit Cholim, a house of sick people, to be called a Beit Rifu'ah, a house of healing. Now, you'd argue the difference is semantics. What's the difference? House of healing, house of sick people. It's semantics. It's just branding. Not just branding. There's a difference in the mindset of the person who walks into that building. If you walk into a house of sick people, you now feel sick. Your mind is, I'm a sick person. I'm in a house of sick people. But if you walk into a Beit Rifu'ah, if you walk into a house of healing, so I walked into a house of healing because I'm going to get healed. And that difference in perspective, the change of words between house of sick people and house of healing, is a difference between sickness and healing. Those words create different realities. And the way we talk about other people creates realities. When we talk about other people in a negative way, when we call them stupid, when we call them ignorant and Nazis and fascists and liberals, and not only I'm worse than just that. I mean, like, we call them ignorant, they're hate, they're crazy, they're evil, they're wicked, they're whatever words we use. Not only is it against Torah, not only is it against Jewish values, those words create a reality of negativity. And the reason why I'm speaking about this now is because before November 3rd, our country is not going to heal, I know. But we have to recognize that the way we speak about each other, to me, is one of the worst things that have happened to our society. One of the worst. Worse than any president. Worse than any political party. Worse than any political opinion. Worse than any corona. Worse than corona. Worse than corona. I'm saying this on record. Worse than coronavirus is the virus of vitriol, of hatred that we feel comfortable saying and writing and posting about other people. Sometimes I go onto Facebook. I don't do it often, thank God. That's why I'm a happy person. But sometimes I'm having late at night, I'll go on Facebook and I'm looking and I read through a comment like, it's crazy. People speak to me about other people. And the hatred is unbelievable. And this is on both sides. There's absolutely no one that can say it's only Republican or only Democrats. It is across the board. It's become okay. It's become acceptable. Freedom of speech. And in our mind, it's true. Whether it's true or not is debatable. But that's not the point. Because even if it's true, Torah does not allow you to speak that way about somebody else. Torah doesn't allow you to speak that way. I'll tell you another story of the Rebbe. There was a donor from China that came to the Rebbe and dollars, and so Rabbi Kolarski introduced him, and Rabbi Kolarski says this is whatever he comes. He's very active with the Jewish community in the Far East. And the Rebbe interrupted Rabbi Kolarski. It's $100. You can see the video. I was almost going to show it tonight, but I didn't have time to find it. The Rebbe interrupts him, but it's a famous video. The Rebbe interrupts Rabbi Kolarski and says, whoever was the Rebbe that was showing it, introducing him, it was Rabbi Krinsky, I don't remember anymore. The Rebbe interrupts him and says, you come from a place that is called the opposite of close. Almost exactly like the way God describes these animals that are not kosher. You come from a place that is the opposite of close, not the Far East. The place in the East that is the opposite of close. Not animals that are treif, animals that are not pure. In 1981, long before society began to call children with special needs children, there was it was considered normal to call kids retarded. And in fact, there was a conference. The conference was called, this was the title of the conference in 1981, Major Conference for the Jewish Community on Issues and Needs of Jewish Retarded. That was the name of the conference. Remember, 1981, the idea of sensitivity in our language didn't exist so much. And the Rebbe wrote a letter to the organizers of this conference. And the Rebbe wrote to them that regard to, I'm quoting now from a letter of the Rebbe, that he wrote to the organizers in 1981, Tes Kislev, 1981, regarding Jewish retarded people, which I prefer to use the term as special people, not simply as a euphemism, but because it would more accurately reflect their situation, especially in view of the fact that in many cases, retardation is limited to the capacity to absorb and assimilate knowledge, while in other areas it may be normal or even above the average. Today, the whole world calls such kids special needs children. 1981, the Rebbe understood to call a child retarded, God forbid, it's not only a statement, it's not only a description, it creates a very negative reality. But if you say a positive reality, if you call them special needs, that actually creates a transformation in how they view themselves, in how we view them, and how we interact with them, and how we appreciate them, and how we value what they offer to the universe. It's a whole different reality. It's a whole different child. It's a whole different world. So here's the lesson for us. There are animals that are kosher, and there are animals that are not kosher. That's a fact. That's a truth. It's a reality. The animals that are kosher will be 7 animals on the ark. The animals that are not kosher, 2 animals on the ark, a reality. And yet God says to Noach as follows. God says to me and to you and to each and every one of us, God sends us the most powerful message. It's true that there are some people that are like you, and it's true some people are not like you. It's true that there are some people that, at least in your version of reality and in your version of truth, which we're not going to change tonight, or maybe never, in your version of truth, there are some people that are kosher and some people that are treif. Fine. You're entitled. The reality is not going to change. But just because in your mind they're treif doesn't allow you to say that. Doesn't allow you to use negative language, to use harsh language, to use crude language, let alone to use some of the foul language that you see. There are nice ways of saying things about other people. And so this is the message for us. There's Lashon Hara, they're saying the truth. And then that's legal matters. That's Lashon Hara is a sin. But then there's a whole beautiful lesson from tonight. Even when you're talking about someone, you want to say that they disagree with you, have different views than you, whatever you want to say about them, to make sure to learn from the way God spoke to Noach, to speak in a clean language, in a pure language, in a holy language, and that will create a pure, refined world. My blessing for all of us is the world should go through its flood. November 3rd, God willing, whatever happens, the world will go through a flood. We'll come out of it, and we'll be like after the flood. After the flood, earth was fresh. The rainbow, altar, offerings, humanity lived in peace and harmony. May that day happen very, very soon with the coming of Mashiach. Bezrat Hashem. Laila Tov, my friends. Good night.